Hello, everybody, and welcome to WordCast number 79. Okay, I almost said 78 again, so that could have been bad. But
Darn, I
Ethan
wish you would have
here.
messed up this time.
I know. It's been a good streak of me not messing it up, which is kind of rare. So it's gonna happen at some point. I'm probably gonna say like 70, 80 or something next time. But yeah,
No, you'll
quite
say
a
3080.
3080. Yes, 3080, or 3090, or I don't know. So quite a bit of interesting news this week. We're going to be talking about some of the RTX 30 series rumors and leaks, as well as we know, Epic is going up against Google and Apple, which is kind of a big deal. And then quite a bit of other stuff, including Mozilla laying people off and some true NAS, free NAS updates and stuff like that. So lots of good news this week.
Yeah. And we're going to start off. So just a few days ago, NVIDIA had started teasing an event. They did this whole thing of 21 days until 21 years was like the start of their teaser.
Yeah.
And that was meant to signify 21 years since the GeForce 256?
I believe so. Yeah. I
Which
don't know. It was
a
before
very,
we were
very
into computers.
yeah. That was a very, very significant GPU in that it was essentially the first modern GPU.
Yeah.
It was the first thing structured in the way GPUs are pretty much now, and so they're hyping up like this as being the biggest deal announcement or the biggest I guess innovation in GPUs or year-over-year innovation at least since then,
Which is huge
pretty
claim.
significant.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, but that's what they're
Yeah.
claiming.
NVIDIA sometimes does like to overhype things.
Yeah. Now, we'll get into how I think that's feasible in a second when we talk about the actual hardware.
Okay.
But first, I just want to talk about how. So the announcement is coming September 1st.
Yeah. So we'll all keep our eyes open for that, and September 1st is a Tuesday, so I'll probably be making a dedicated video on that, and then we'll also talk about it in the podcast the following week.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that it's not on a Monday. Like, I get why these events are never on Mondays, because they want to show up, make sure everything is prepared the day beforehand.
Yeah.
But I don't work Mondays.
Right, yeah. Tuesday works for me, though, because I don't work my second job, so I'll have time at home to compile and do a video.
Yeah.
Talking head, probably right here.
As far as actual hardware that we're expecting, though, we've gotten some leaks and some confirmations on things. The first thing, probably the biggest thing,
Micron oopsied.
Yeah, Micron essentially confirmed a couple things about the 3090.
Yeah.
So they confirmed the speed. Now, the speed was the main thing they're advertising, so this is the thing that I think is most likely like 100% correct, whereas I do think that it's possible that the VRAM that they're claiming could be wrong in that it's not essential to what they are advertising in the same way. But what they were talking about was their GDDR6X VRAM. And this is supposed to be between 19 and 21 gigabits per second.
Yeah, which is pretty significant.
Yeah. For reference, GDDR6 is like 14 to 16. Yeah. So we're looking at like a
pretty significant
almost
jump.
Third increase, if not more.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. I mean, the 12 gigs of VRAM is, about what we expected in terms of the amount, but that speed is pretty impressive, and that could help potentially even with things like SLI and other kind of more, unique.
Well, it's not
setups.
SLI anymore.
Yes, right, yeah, it's NVLink, but the faster memory can help with that sort of thing, as well as help with multi-GPU setups for rendering and stuff, not just for gaming, so it's pretty cool.
And I wonder how helpful that is for ray tracing.
Yeah, that's something that...
Because... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think ray tracing is definitely something that's going to have a pretty drastic benefit from it. So ray tracing is bandwidth intensive. We do know that. Obviously, it's processing intensive too, but... Like, if they're able to get the processing power of the tensor cores and stuff up to be able to do even better processing and get you better frame rates and stuff of ray tracing, I think the higher VRAM speed is going to be even more important at that point. So it could, in some ways, be a hint or an indication of a significant jump in ray tracing performance, which is exactly what we'd expect. But
Yeah, because supposedly what we're going to see is both a very, very significant increase in ray tracing performance per RT core,
yeah,
as well as a big increase in RT cores.
yeah,
And
yep,
so if we're getting all of that and then the faster memory bandwidth, I think that's the point they're going to make as far as biggest increase since 1999 in performance.
yeah,
Is we're going to go from ray tracing being, if this is all true, a realistically fairly minor thing used for uh, a small number of features within a game,
uh-huh,
to being a bit wider scale. Like if we can make it so that any game that wants to use ray traced global illumination can do that, and then still also do good ray traced reflections, for example, turning on a couple of features at a time
yeah, yeah.
instead of being limited to just like lower res ray traced reflections,
It's a big deal.
or or GI, or one of just a number of different things.
Hmm.
Um, and if we can achieve that while increasing frame rate this gen instead of having it lower, like obviously ray tracing will be lower than no ray tracing,
Well, right, right, but
but
just like having,
yeah, if the
yeah,
GPU itself can be so much better overall, and the ray tracing can be so much less of a performance hit, that we can see an increase in frame rates if you go from like a 2080 with no ray tracing to a 3080 with ray tracing and play at higher frames. That's what I think their
yeah,
goal in advertising is going to be, is that, hey, we can do this. That's how big of an increase it would be.
yeah, yeah, and I think that would warrant them, saying that this is one of the biggest leaps that they've had and stuff. And it's the same thing where like I feel like Nvidia when they're pushing for new GPUs, it's not uncommon for them to push something as the first real-time ray tracing or the first 4K gaming card and kind of be a year off, like, right? So like the 980 Ti was the first 4K gaming card when they talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the Titan that it was based on. And it was like 1080 Ti is actually really good for 4K. 980 Ti was like I didn't really consider that a 4K card myself. And I think we're going to see a similar kind of jump here, where a lot of people didn't consider the 2000 series being that great for ray tracing, and I think we're going to see a jump where now it's like people that don't care as much about ray tracing but are still have an interest in it are going to want to shell out the money for it.
Yeah, and like personally for me, I considered the 20 series more of like ray tracing development cards. And I think
Yeah,
even on WordCast we had talked about how I'm like, this is laying the groundwork for the better cards. It takes a lot of time to learn how to, you know, develop an entirely new rendering technique.
yeah,
Because this
yeah.
is not just a lighting effect in a game. This is actually changing how things are rendered.
Right, right, exactly. So I think it was kind of an early adopter series, but the thing that was, obviously they were expensive, but there was also, without ray tracing, the performance increase was pretty drastic with the
Yeah.
2000 series over the 10,000 series, and that was where some people had a heavier interest in it. You know,
1000 series, not 10,000.
yeah, sorry. I
We're
personally
not there yet.
still
We're still 7 years away from that, Ethan.
something along those lines, right? But I'm still running 1080 Ti's in my system.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like the 2000 series was big enough of a jump, but I do have a 2060 to play with, ray tracing too. So I think that's exactly right. I think it was kind of a development card and a test card, people that wanted to see what this could be like, rather than people that like actually were expecting to use it constantly.
Yeah. Well, and then the other nice thing is that, so with consoles getting ray tracing, obviously the ray tracing effects will be much less significant because they are, they're very weak in the ray tracing hardware side.
Yeah, yeah,
What we're going to see is that more and more developers will have a better understanding of how to develop ray tracing and how to implement it in their engines and in their games.
yeah. That's a good
And
point.
then from there, that's where PC can come in and be the unique thing and be the, like, instead of just a couple of ray tracing effects, we can be ray tracing is widespread.
Yeah, and like ray tracing VR and other stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And like this will be how it contrasts with consoles, which realistically consoles are jumping ahead for the next few years because of IO.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
so this is going to be the thing, is that it's, without this, consoles would straight up be ahead in some regards as far as how games are developed, because there's so many things that you can't do when you have to develop for hard drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a very, very hard limit on things. And so without a big jump in ray tracing, we would have seen, obviously like resolution is going to be better on a 3080 Ti or a 3090 than what a console can put out anyway.
Yeah.
But resolution isn't everything.
No, no, it's
Um,
not. And I mean, I would. A lot of people would play at lower res with like better ray tracing or something like that.
yeah. And so being able to have them rather than just constantly leapfrogging one another,
Yeah.
or not constantly because this gen they didn't really do that, but that's traditionally what's happened with consoles is they've jumped ahead for a few years
Mm-hmm.
because of some new innovation, and then PC has not just surpassed but skyrocketed ahead,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then consoles launched just barely above,
Well, and a
and
lot of
then
times with PC, it's like if you can spend the money at the same time, then you can get something that's equivalent in a lot of ways.
yeah, whereas where this looking at this generation, you couldn't do that because the fact of the matter is that no matter how much money you spend on your PC, that doesn't change the fact that there's not going to be games made for a while that are made just for the SSD. Whereas
Yeah,
PlayStation 5 will have exclusive games made just for that.
a
And
lot
then in
of them.
addition to that, PlayStation 5 will have third party games get optimized for that much sooner than PC
Mm-hmm.
because PC, until you make the commitment to drop hard drives, like
Yeah,
what are you going to have an SSD download on Steam and a hard drive download on Steam? Like that might work for certain types of games where the user base would be more savvy.
yeah, but it has to be like it has to become a point where it's automated, where if they're going to start doing that on PC, like things like Steam and other game platforms are going to have to recognize the type of drive that you're using and determine
Mm-hmm.
if that drive is good enough for you to be able to purchase the game. So like they shouldn't like they would have to automate it in a way where you can't just go to steampowered.com and purchase the game there. You have to purchase it with the client on a machine that's powerful enough and has the SSD to
I
do
mean, no,
that,
they don't. I don't think they have to do that because like PC games have had min spec requirements for years.
Okay, this is true, but I mean, I think a
There are
hard drive
games
is
now.
or SSD as a min spec is one
That's
that's
what the refund policy is for, though. In fact, this would be the best
true.
example of the refund policy: is you start downloading the game, or you buy the game, and then before you can even download it, once you get onto your client, or once you try to initiate the download from the app,
Yeah,
it says, "Oh, you can't install this because you have an SSD." But that's for once we reach that point. I'm talking about like
hmm
I doubt we're going to see, especially for PC, like I doubt we're ever going to see a point where developers are making an SSD optimized and a non SSD optimized game. Or
no, right, right,
some will.
yeah.
Not very many will release both. But if
They're
you're
gonna go all
releasing,
the way there if they're gonna do it. Yeah,
yeah, if you're releasing cross-platform or cross-generation games, then it
yeah,
makes sense to do in some regards because like you're already doing it.
right.
If you optimize for the PS5 and the Xbox One's SSD, and you optimize for the PS4 and the Xbox One's hard drive, then you've already done that work.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, but I think it'll be a lot longer until we see PC games made just for SSDs outside of like, I mean, Star Citizen is kind of now,
Yeah,
but also Star Citizen isn't really a game anymore yet.
I mean, yeah, it's still unplayable in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. And so like it's nice that rather than console just jumping ahead for a while, we're seeing them just kind of take different paths.
Yeah, they're divulging
Is
a
more
bit.
so I guess
Yeah,
the point I wanted to get at. And like eventually, I'm sure that the mid-generation refresh of these consoles will have better ray tracing hardware, and I'm sure that in a few years PCs will have SSD specific titles,
yeah,
and they'll kind of converge again, and just at different levels. But it's nice that it's not just one leapfrogging the other now.
yeah, yeah. There's some uniqueness here this time
Mm-hmm.
around. Yeah, yeah, definitely, and it's an exciting time. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
just excited to see what this is going to be like. Like this next gen stuff, especially with some of these rumored clock speeds and stuff coming out of the 3000 series are really impressive.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. So you want to go ahead with the 3080?
yeah, yeah. So there's some leaks and rumors, which of course, like take it with somewhat of a grain of salt, but it's leaked from videocards.com where they usually do a pretty good job with their leaks. So it looks like the 3080 Ti might have up to a 2.1 gigahertz max clock, which would be the boost clock, of course, and 10 gigs of VRAM. So that's already quite a bit of VRAM for what is not the top end card from the series. 10
Mm-hmm.
gigs is a pretty big jump, even over the 8 gigs that we get. And then 2.1 gigahertz would be really impressive. You know, we're seeing higher and higher clocks on GPUs, and you know, that is 2.1 gigahertz is a pretty big leap, even over the 2080 Ti, I believe. Let me double check this really quick. But it's we're seeing clock speed increases, and again, like, it'll probably overclock further than that. You know, we can't say off the top of our heads how good the overclocking is really going to be. But yeah, like, if you look at the boost clock of the 2080 Ti is 1635 megahertz. Now, there have been some people that have gotten that, and I think even 2080s to the 2 gigahertz realm, but that's like extreme overclocking. This is out of the box. So
Yeah.
pretty impressive. So
Yeah, and this is pretty likely to be accurate too when you look at how they got the information on this one. So
yeah.
the recent driver, there was like a recent driver update, I think, through Microsoft's end, not through Nvidia's,
Uh-huh.
that had leaked a device ID of 2206, which was confirmed by outside sources to video cards to be the 3080.
Okay.
And a device ID of 2206 is what showed up on user benchmark with these
Yeah.
numbers.
So it's pretty substantiated at that point.
Yeah, it's very likely that at least there is a device being tested with these specs, whether or not that's what launches.
Yeah, like, we may see it have, you know, a little bit lower clocks when it launches, but they're at least
Yeah.
attempting to push to
Yeah,
this
depending on
range.
yields, they might not be able to hit that for all of them, or who knows. Maybe this is a downsampled version of the card. I doubt it, but
Right, yeah. Like, maybe there's something here that's making it appear better than it could be, but I don't know. It's interesting. You know, I'm really excited for this 3000 series launch. I've been waiting a long time for it. I've been on the 1000, not 10,000 series for a long time. And I'm hoping that this is a big enough jump that it's worth the upgrade. And of course, I'm going to wait to see what AMD has going on this year as well, because AMD, we haven't had as many rumors, but AMD is looking potentially really promising this time around.
yeah, I mean, we had a lot of rumors before. It just seems like because they're not as close to launch, we're not seeing as much of this side of things.
Yeah.
Because, like, from what I remember before, what we saw was that their top end card was expected to be quite a bit above the 2080 Ti, but I don't want to say quite a bit below, like essentially placed somewhere in the middle of the 2080 Ti and the new 3080, 3090. Who knows where
Yeah, whatever
exactly
they
that
call it.
slotted in with that card. But it was going
Yeah.
to be below some of the NVIDIA cards, but above the 2080 Ti.
Yeah. Now, the big thing is, though, AMD sometimes tends to be somebody that includes some more workstation type features and a little bit less limitations on the driver end for workstation work. And so that's why I'm particularly interested in waiting for it to see what happens. Because even if the gaming performance and the ray tracing performance isn't as good, you know, if it's like I can spend, you know, let's say $800 on a card, or $1,000 that has like 24 gigs of VRAM, instead of having to spend like 2,500 on whatever the next Titan is that has 24 gigs of VRAM. Like,
Yeah.
that could potentially be more useful to me, even if it's 15% slower in game, but still, you know, a good 30% leap over like my 1080 Ti.
Yeah.
So that's why and you know, that's been something that has been true even for a while, is like AMD has been behind on the GPU front for a while, but they have had advantages in the department of workstation type tasks. VRAM, driver stability was better for a while. It seems like that's kind of flipped a little bit again, but you know, so it's being closer in performance is going to make those other things matter even more in some ways, right? Because it's like, oh, you can get more VRAM, and you are, you know, and potentially like more stable drivers, just as an example, and it's like that's costing you less money, and you're only getting slightly lower performance. And in many cases, in some areas, you'll get actually better performance in workstation specific things like SolidWorks or even video rendering and stuff like that. So I'm excited to see the direction that we go with GPUs this time around, but I do fully expect the top end NVIDIA part, 3090 or whatever it is, excluding the Titan, just the top end of the 3000 series to beat whatever AMD is putting out.
Yeah.
That wouldn't
And
be surprising.
I'm going to be really interested to see what the ray tracing performance is, because we know it's going to have RT
Yeah.
hardware.
Right.
Like, that
Yeah.
is confirmed at this point.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's going to be easier, I feel like, or it's not necessarily easier to develop for, but it's going to be, developers will be more familiar with RDNA 2 ray tracing
Yes.
hardware because of consoles.
Yep.
And so it gives them an advantage in some regards, despite very likely being worse ray tracing hardware. Like I'd be very
Yeah.
shocked if they came all that close to NVIDIA's, because NVIDIA is not on a first gen, they're on a second. And even
Yeah.
NVIDIA's first gen was something that they had worked on for a very significant amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, seeing games like Minecraft fully ray traced, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those are going to be really playable on the 3000 series, I feel like. Um, and like that's an example where those might still struggle on AMD hardware when it's ray traced
Yeah,
GI, you know?
it depends on how much, I guess, how much they can scale up, because we know that both the Xbox and the PlayStation don't have a ton of RT cores or whatever
Yeah.
their version of that is.
Yeah.
We know that they're not meant to be like, insane amounts of ray tracing, but they will do like ray traced reflections or ray traced GI or whatever, depending on the game.
Right.
Um, and my guess is very little ray traced GI. With what we've seen from Unreal Engine 5, that doesn't seem as necessary. It seems like there's some new GI methods that are in the pipeline for developers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so it's like I wonder how much better the consumer GPUs are going to be compared to the console GPUs
No, that's a good
for
point.
ray
Yeah.
tracing.
It's going to be interesting to see what that's like. And one of the things that I'm, hoping and kind of I'm speculating because I'm hoping is that the 3000 series we see a very significant jump in the ray tracing performance of the lower end parts as well. I would love
Oh
to
yeah.
see like a 3060, being capable of ray tracing, not necessarily overall game performance, but ray tracing on the level of like a 2080 or 2080 Ti, right? So that we get, like you can actually play these games that have ray tracing, because it felt like with like the
From
2060, like the games that I've tested on the 2060 with ray tracing on, they're beautiful, but they're like barely playable.
So from my understanding, it might actually be more of a jump than that.
Okay, okay,
Supposedly, we're looking at a 3 to 4x ray tracing improvement,
okay, that would be amazing. Yeah, because that's
because we're
that's
looking at the improvement both in number of RT cores and the improvement in performance per core.
yeah, okay. So that would be I guess that was where I feel like the 2000 series was lacking, is if you really wanted to use ray tracing, not just to test it, but to actually play with it, like you kind of had to get a 2080 or even more like a 2080 Ti, like a 2060, a
2070
2070.
Ti could do it pretty well.
Yeah, the
Even a 2070
2070,
was okay.
they were okay, but I mean, like there was, you had to turn down a lot of other stuff to get a more playable frame rate, and like the 2060 was, almost useless.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tested that one personally, like, but like the 2080 Max Q, for example, in my Alienware laptop, like I've been able to actually do pretty decent ray tracing on some games with that. It's been, fairly impressive. So, this is going to be that realm where it's like it's really properly capable though. So I'm pretty excited for
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
But for me personally and the type of work I do, things like VRAM might be more important in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I may not even go NVIDIA this time around. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the really weird design that we're seeing from the card, like from the 3080 cards,
Yeah.
is likely coming from all of the work they're doing on RT, because they are apparently doing like an entire coprocessor for ray tracing.
Rather than being on the same die, it's going to be like a separate die. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and that's why there's fans on both sides. Is that they're
Oh.
the actual coprocessor for the ray tracing is actually on the other side.
Okay. I had missed that part then. I'd missed that rumor
Yeah,
somehow.
look up if you want to look at it, look up traversal coprocessor is I think what it was called.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And there was some stuff about that a while, or I don't want to say a while ago. It was like a week or two ago.
Right. Right. But like, yeah. Okay. I see. Interesting. That could be really cool, actually. Okay, that would make a lot of sense as to why it has the fans on both sides, because it is a weird design. Though, if that's the case, that's going to make water cooling blocks a little more challenging. We're going to have to see, like, sandwich water cooling blocks where you, like...
It might make for some real cool designs, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, what they could do is still have, like, essentially one block, but just parts that you lift them apart a little bit and then slot the card in and then sandwiches back down and bolt the other sides down or something like that.
Yeah.
So... I'm excited to see what all this is like, because I mean, end of this year is the big upgrade to this guy over here. The big GPU and water cooling and storage upgrades that I'm planning, and so this is exciting. I hope we see good stuff.
Yeah, like my guess is that the end goal is that the ray tracing hardware itself is good enough that turning ray tracing on does not represent a performance hit for everything else because the ray tracing hardware does all the work.
Yeah, yeah. So then at that point, that's actually a major benefit because that is one of the things that we've obviously seen with the 20 series, where you see this dip in regular
Yeah.
performance when you turn on the ray tracing.
And
So.
I should say with ray tracing on, I mean like to the settings optimized for that card. Obviously, some settings
Right,
will
yeah.
hurt any card, but
Well, and I mean, being a coprocessor like that, right? Like what's the slowest link, right? You know, like if the coprocessor can only handle the ray tracing at 30 frames a second, like, and that's what you're going to be running at is 30 frames a second, you know. So
well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to ray trace too. I mean, that would be a problem for GI, and that would be a problem for
mhm.
reflections in competitive games. But slower frame rate,
The
ray
rays could
trace
be behind the
reflections.
rest of the
Yeah,
game, yeah. And we could see some blend of rasterization and ray tracing. You could potentially even see, like, this is just speculation. It would depend on how hard this is to do, and you'd probably know better than me. But like having something that's rasterized at high frame rate until the ray tracing can finish that area, but they'd have to do it in some kind of way of a smooth transition. Obviously, you don't want just some jarring switch to the better lighting every time you enter a
yeah. I
room.
think that would be the problem is the jarring
Yeah.
switch.
There'd have to be some kind of blend where it slowly does it, where the lighting slowly gets better. Kind of like what
I,
we've seen with some of the Epic's new engine, Unreal Engine, where you walk into an area and it's like,
yeah, but I feel like a
yeah,
consistent timing difference because of the way that like the Unreal
yeah,
5 global illumination works like that. Yes, it takes a couple of frames to update, but it's a consistent couple of frames.
that's true. That's true. So it's behind
And
the same amount.
if you're already having a couple of frames for that to happen in non ray traced GI, then
Yeah,
if you're still gonna have that difference, there's no point in doing the transition.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, but it'll still be interesting. Yeah, and I mean, you can obviously turn the ray tracing down to match what that card can do as well. So
Yeah, and that's more
yeah.
so like what I'm thinking is like, there will be like a 3080 optimized setting
Hmm.
for the ray tracing hardware, probably done via GeForce Experience, where they'll have
Yeah.
something where it's like you can turn on in GeForce Experience the ray tracing settings optimized for that card. And with
Yeah.
those settings, you wouldn't see a performance hit. But if you decided to go above that, then that's when you'd see the performance hit.
And maybe even see something like that in game settings, right, where you have like a ray tracing level and you select your card,
Mhm.
because then they
I
know
mean, the
what.
game can also just auto detect your card and have that be the default ray tracing setting.
Yeah, that's true. But here's the other thing though too, right? So if it's a coprocessor, maybe that coprocessor is going to be the same throughout the whole ray trace lineup, right? And then just the
That's
regular.
possible unless
Yeah.
VRAM mattered for the performance because we are looking
Hmm.
at different VRAM speeds and stuff across the stack. From my understanding, so
Yeah.
the 3080 is expected to be 19 gigabits per second,
Hmm.
whereas like the 3090 is expected to be up to 21.
Yeah.
And my guess would be that 3070 and 3060 are probably going to use GDDR6 like at the top end, so probably 16.
So if
Um,
that bandwidth is shared, though, right, then those bandwidth decreases, they could still have the same amount of bandwidth for the coprocessor, right, and just have
that's
the
true.
decrease for the main chip that handles everything else. And so
Mm.
maybe that's what they're gonna do is they're gonna be like you're selecting your performance in game, and it's not affecting your ray tracing performance. That would be really interesting. That would be
And that would make
interesting.
it
Yeah.
so much easier for developers to optimize for.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
It's
there
like
was
this
a
is just what we have.
if there was like a singular ray tracing target
Hmm.
per generation of GPU.
That would be really nice. That would be really easy for developers, better for optimization, and less confusing on consumers because you just turn on ray tracing, and that ray
Mhm.
tracing is built for that series, and older games, you just turn it on because they're going to be, less performance requirements for that.
Yeah.
So,
Even if that's not what they're doing this generation, depending on how much the cost of that coprocessor is, that might be something that they should consider long term.
yeah, because in a lot of ways, too, when you have silicon, right, like manufacturing more of the same one is cheaper than trying to make different levels.
Yeah, I mean it's why we oftentimes see cards that are like, the 80 card is often just a cut down version of the
Of whatever the max,
TI
like,
or of
Titan
the
is. Yeah.
Titan is, yeah.
Yeah. Like, yeah.
We already see that, where they're literally making the same GPUs and just changing the price.
Yeah, yeah, and just selecting the slightly lower quality silicon bits. for those, sometimes and in some cases, you know, as we see, you know, like photolitho quality go up and have the more consistency in the amount of chips that you can get out of a single wafer that can hit full performance, they'll still just take those, and even though they could sell them for more, they'll just turn off course to keep up with demand. So so that could be interesting. That could be a really cool way of doing it. And so then you're back to kind of selecting a GPU around all the other things, and you're not having to think about the ray tracing portion.